Hey Guardians, I just want to let everyone know that I do have both a Twitch and a Twitter, and I'm very active on both. Feel free to come give me a follow on both, links in the description. Yeah, I may have found my new favorite exotic. Guardians, as I'm sure you all know, Dragon's Shadow got a huge change with the release of Edge of Fate, and though I will never forgive Bungie for what they did to speedloaders in PvP, this is honestly more than an adequate replacement. This is obviously a PvP exotic, but there's a little play in PvE that we'll talk about. Now, this will be something of a deep dive into Dragon's Shadow. We'll talk about how it was changed, why it's worth considering over the usual hunter exotics, the pros and cons of dragons versus other exotics, and why it's likely my new go-to for PvP. Now, when it comes to PvP, hunters have a solid assortment of PvP exotics, Stompies, Lucky Pants, RDMs, and Knucklehead being typically the preferred choices, though I myself was always a big fan of Speedloader Slacks. But in most cases, players opted for exotics that gave more of a neutral benefit. Stompies, of course, for movement, Lucky Pants for similar movement benefits, but of course it also boosted hand cannons, specifically their airborne effectiveness, draw time, and accuracy after you draw the weapon. Then, of course, RDMs for dodge spam and the ability to just not use your sights at all, really. And lastly, of course, you had Knucklehead to keep your radar up while you're aiming down your sights, and of course to mark targets when you damage them. Now, all of these exotics have been and are still very, very strong choices inside of PvP. In fact, during my very last-minute Ascendant climb last season, I used RDMs and Lucky Pants for most of it. But none of those really fit what I'm looking for in a piece of exotic armor that is PvP focused. Now, something that I've talked about before is over the last couple of years, I've become something of a handling fiend when it comes to my weapons, but finding an exotic that filled that niche was extremely difficult on Hunter. Now, of course, before Edge of Fate dropped, we still had Dragon's Shadow and Speedloader Slacks, but both of these exotics relied on using your dodge to get any real benefit. Now, of the two, back then I preferred Speedloaders because before they were changed, kills would increase that handling benefit and would refresh the timer of that benefit, leading to an overall higher uptime than Dragon's Shadow. That is, of course, provided you had some streak momentum, but this meant it had limited usefulness in modes outside of sixes. In Trials, for example, Speedloaders felt borderline useless, and in comp, it's easy to lose that streak momentum purely because there's fewer opponents. And then yes, of course, there are the exotic class items with Ophidians, but I didn't like being limited to Prismatic, particularly given that Void Hunter is honestly just stronger, and I generally prefer to play Solar Hunter anyway. And at one point, I even mained Warlock for most of a season purely because of Ophidians giving me the weapon handling I wanted. But I'm still a Hunter main. I like how Hunter plays more, so that honestly didn't last for very long. But with the changes to Dragon's Shadow with Edge of Fate, we finally have a strong, neutral handling exotic for Hunter. So let's take a look at how it was changed. So before the DLC dropped, when you used your dodge, Dragon's Shadow would give you a boost to your weapon handling, movement speed, and mobility stat, and it would reload all of your weapons. Now, of course, some people really loved this exotic, but I never really cared for it because, again, it was dependent on using a dodge to gain any benefit, which made it a tough choice when compared to other exotics that gave you various benefits from neutral. Like, again, Stompy's movement, Lucky Pants movement, and hand cannon boosts, RDM's hipfire accuracy, so on and so forth. But now, Dragon's Shadow gives you a boost to both your weapon handling and stability from neutral, and when you dodge to proc Wraith Metal Mail, it increases that boost, reloads your equipped weapon, and increases your movement speed and class stat. Now, it is kind of unfortunate that it no longer reloads all of your weapons, and honestly, I do think they should have left that as a feature for the exotic, but if I have to trade that to get a neutral handling and stability increase, then I'll happily take that trade. Now, unfortunately, I honestly can't find any solid numbers about how much of an increase you get from Dragon's Shadow, both with and without Wraith Metal procced, but even from neutral, the buffs are are very, very noticeable. Now, let's start by taking a look at the handling, and note that all of the footage you're seeing in the background is with a 100 or above weapon stat. Since handling is important to me, I wanted to max that out as much as possible, so that's why I have honestly decided to just keep a higher weapon stat. Now, let's start with a fairly basic setup. Ace of Spades with Matador. First, we have the handling with no Dragon Shadow, 1 kinetic handling mod, and 1 arc, and without threat detector on Matador procced. And unsurprisingly, it's extremely slow. Now here we can see the swap speeds with threat detector procced, and it's definitely faster, but for me at least not fast enough. Now let's see it again, same overall setup, but with Dragon Shadow on this time. First without threat detector, and you can already see a night and day difference. The swap speed is noticeably faster with Dragon Shadow. Now again, but with threat detector procced, and we're talking like an exponential difference here. But of course, it can get even better. Now let's look at it again, but this time with Wraith Metal Mail procced. First, without threat detector, and I mean, the footage there speaks for itself, and if we have both Wraith Metal Mail and threat detector procced, yeah, it's a little bit insane, honestly. Now, of course, the benefit of this is obvious in the current sandbox where freaks are constantly running at you with fusion, slugs, glaives, pellets, peregrines, so on and so forth. Having the option to swap to a shotgun in an emergency is basically a must-have, purely because it gives you a way to have a chance at defending yourself from those freaks. Or, for that matter, say you're running an SMG, you see one of the many scout rifle rats plaguing PvP right now in the back of the map, and they're looking right at you. If you have a sniper for a backup, a faster swap speed gives you something of a chance to swap to it, and at the very least body shot them and force them into cover long enough for you to get away. And Dragon Shadow does make this easier. Plus, this also opens up roles and weapons that otherwise you might not consider, such as in the background right now I'm using Ace with the new Pressipole shotgun with 1 kinetic handling mod, 2 void handling mods, but there is no handling perk whatsoever on the shotgun. It has Lone Wolf and opening shot, no threat detector, and the speed is still there. But in this case, you also have the bonus of the fast ADS from Lone Wolf and the aim assist from both Lone Wolf and opening shot. And it also makes weapons that otherwise generally feel terrible to use due to low handling, such as 360 autos or rapid fire pulse rifles, much more viable, at least in 6s if you're taking those into comp or trials you're throwing. Now next, let's take a look at the stability bump. Now from neutral, the stability increase is a little more mixed. Now the benefits from stability are obvious. More stability means less overall recoil, which means easier gunfights, and it also helps you take a little less flinch. And while this is generally more important for controller players, high stability weapons still feel incredible on M&K. Now from neutral, the stability on Dragon Shadow isn't quite as noticeable as the handling on certain weapons that are already just generally very stable, such as the Summoner here, first without dragons, then with dragons, and without any attempt at controlling the recoil. The boost from dragons is still noticeable, but it isn't that big of a deal. Where you'll really notice it is with weapons that tend to have heavier recoil, such as with a 49 stability Kramils here, again first without dragons, and then with it. Now this does have slideways on it, but in this instance I'm not proccing it at all, and you can see a huge difference. Then next up with Abyss Defiant with a 53 stability stat, same as before, first without dragons, and then with dragons. But where the stability becomes extremely noticeable on all weapons is with Wraith Metal Mail procced. So for the sake of comparison, here's that same Kramils, first without Dragon Shadow, and again, I'm not using slideways for these tests, and I am not controlling my recoil at all for any of these. Now, the same Kramils with dragons and Wraith Metal Mail procced. Now Abyss with Wraith Metal. Now Ace. And now Kvostov. So, while the stability bump isn't as noticeable as the handling from neutral, it's insanely strong with Wraith Metal Mail procced. So, for players like me who just want to use their guns in PvP because we'd like to play our first-person shooter like a first-person shooter, Dragon's Shadow is one of the best exotics, if not the best, in the game purely because it just makes all of your weapons better. And it takes weapons you otherwise might not ever even think about taking into PvP and opens them up as well purely because they're getting a substantial bump in their performance. And while, of course, most of my time in Edge of Fate so far has been light level grinding, during the time I've been able to spend in PvP, I genuinely have not been able to take Dragon's Shadow off. It just makes all of my guns feel so damn good. So those are the benefits, but is this worth picking over the other typical hunter exotics? I would say it's definitely worth considering, but there's a lot of factors that do come into that decision. Now, the main benefit of dragons is that it helps your weapons, but depending on the player or scenario, other exotics might provide more value, such as Stompies, for example. While it's just a movement exotic, that speed allows you to reach objectives or power positions faster. So if you're on a sniper, fusion, or slug, that speed could mean the difference between whether or not you get an opening pick in a trials match purely because you get to get a line of sight on an opponent faster. And the longer slide with Stompies might be the difference between winning or losing a shotgun duel when you slide a corner, or it might help you get out of a gunfight that you might just lose otherwise. Then with Lucky Pants, while it only gives you any real benefits when you have a hand cannon out, it gives you similar movement and it boosts your airborne effectiveness, which could be the difference between winning or losing a gunfight if you're in the air. And of course, that instant ready speed for hand cannons means if you hit someone in the body with a slug or make them weak with a fusion, you could easily swap to a 120 for an easier cleanup. And then RDMs, of course, makes it so that if you're using a good hipfire weapon such as the S-Stock or Division with hipfire grip, you really don't ever have to use your sights, which means you move faster in gunfights purely due to having a faster strafe speed, and you'll never be without your radar. Plus, with the extra class ability energy from primary kills, it will give you an overall higher uptime on your dodge, which is of course particularly valuable on Invis Hunter since you have the ability to stay off your opponent's radar for longer, which makes it harder for people to pre-nade you, slide you with shotguns, or pre-charge you with a fusion rifle. And then of course, Knucklehead Radar is just a great information exotic. You keep your radar up at all times, which means if you're looking down your sights holding a lane, it's harder for people to flank you. And of course, if you deal damage to someone, you can see them through walls, and the benefit there is pretty well self-explanatory. So all of these exotics also provide extremely powerful benefits, and depending on the player, map, mode, or the type of team you're fighting, they still might provide more value. But on the flip side, Dragon's Shadow is still an extremely strong choice. That faster swap speed might save your life in a trials match when someone comes flying around a corner with a shotgun, or at the very least allow you to trade out so your team is in a 2v2 instead of a 2v3. And with the number of freaks just running at you with special weapons and melees these days, that's a scenario you will run into literally every single match regardless of the mode. And of course you have that extra stability, which might be just enough to let you land that last shot in a last point 1v1 that determines a comp match or a trials match, or make it easier to land shots against a team playing long range. My only real complaint is that with the completely unnecessary mobility nerfs that came with Edge of Fate, I almost feel like I have to double or even triple my mobility mods on my boots. But outside of that, like I said, I love this exotic. It's really become my new favorite. So realistically, what I'd recommend is taking some time with Dragon's Shadow to determine whether or not it fits your playstyle. Take it into comp, trials, wherever you spend the most time in PvP, and just see if it works for you or not. Now, for me, there's a very real chance that I just never take Dragon's Shadow off. I am not a build crafter, I do not participate in degen PvP build crafting. For the most part, I play my shooters like shooters, so anything that boosts my guns is a welcome addition. Now, I did say there's some play in PvE, and there is, but it's very, very limited, and honestly, I'd imagine most of you already know what I'm referring to. Really, the main place Dragon's Shadow will work okay play in PvE is as a DPS exotic. That's pretty much it. The handling boosts make for very fast, clean damage rotations, and if it's against a boss requiring precision damage where you're more likely to need something like an LFR, the stability boost is helpful also. But that's really pretty much it. You could have this in a loadout and swap to it before or during a DPS phase, but honestly, for that purpose, speed loaders is probably still a better option purely because it will also give a handling buff to your allies, whereas Dragon Shadow only buffs you. So that's Dragon Shadow, not the best choice in PvE, but extremely strong in PvP. And that is all for me today, Guardians. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Dragon Shadow. If you did, and if you found it helpful, then do me a favor and leave me a like and comment how you're liking dragons, and of course, hit that subscribe button with the bell icon. Also, do me a favor and check the description for my other links. For now, I'll see you all in the next video. Peace, Guardians.